Going to get going. So again, my name is Trevor Lowell. I work at the Vermont Agency of Agriculture. I'm going to sort of MC this webinar for you all. I'm going to go through a little bit of the agenda and just some housekeeping stuff to kick us off. So we're going to hear first today from Kyle Harris from the Ag Agency. Kyle will be walking through some of the legislative changes, summarizing what is new with this new local definition law. After Kyle's presentation, we're going to hear from Shannon Salambier from the Attorney General's Office of Consumer Protection. Shannon's going to speak a little bit to their approach to enforcement, what this means for businesses, how to contact them, and the sort of proper channels for dealing with enforcement. And after we hear from Shannon, we will have a couple guest speakers, Alan and Jacob from the Hanover Co-op, to talk a little bit about the impact from a retail standpoint, and then also Annie Rowell from Sodexo and Vermont First to talk about some of their work in tracking local and some of the impacts with working with distributors. And then we're going to round it out with some comments from Abby Willard from the Ag Agency. The goal is to leave a good chunk of time towards the end for questions and answers. So if you have questions that come up during the presentation, hang on to them. Or if you are using the computer, if you're tuning in online, there is a chat function with Microsoft Teams. So you can put your questions into the chat at any point during the presentation. We'll have folks monitoring that and making sure that those questions get answered during the Q&A session. Just a couple things to be aware of. If you are on the computer, you should see, whether you're either on the browser or a desktop app, a microphone icon sometimes shows up on the top right corner of your screen, or sometimes if you hover over your face, that's your mute unmute button. So again, just if everybody could stay on mute for the first part of the presentation, and then if you have questions, make sure to unmute yourself that way as we get to the Q&A. If you're calling in on the phone, the way to do that is to hit *6. So everybody should be muted now. And if you're on the phone and you have a question, just hit *6 first to unmute yourself. We are recording this webinar, and it will be posted to the program webpage a couple days after this. So if folks have things that they missed or wanted to go back and review any of the information, it will be available there. There's also a long list of frequently asked questions on the program webpage, as well as some other guidance, some more summary documentation, and just a lot more information for folks to navigate and understand if there are other questions. And then we're here to answer questions as well. So Kyle is the primary contact at the Ag Agency, and we'll have his information posted on some slides later too. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Kyle Harris to talk about the changes.
Thanks, Trevor, and good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us on this snowy Tuesday afternoon. See a lot of names that I recognize in the participant list, and some that I've already made acquaintance with throughout this process, and others I hope to get a little bit more acquainted with, especially if you continue to have questions after this. I think it's important to remember that, the goal of this whole thing is to get answers to your questions, because they better inform us and how this new definition may impact a lot of your products or things that you're seeing out around the state. So Vermont's new local definition, what does it mean, and what has changed? So Trevor, you can forward to the next slide. So I thought it would be prudent to start with the previous definition. So the previous definition focused on point of sale, where a product was sold. That had to originate in Vermont or 30 miles from a point of sale. And this is interesting because technically a product could be local to Bennington and not local to Montpelier, or local to Newport and not local to Burlington, or local to White River Junction and not local to, I don't know, Manchester, for certain reasons and how we define this 30-mile scope, and especially as it relates to those border towns. Another interesting thing about the way that we previously defined local food is this word originate. What exactly does that mean? It's easy from what we consider raw ag product, for the most part, perspective to identify where something originates. But if something's a processed food or you have an animal that was raised in New York or Pennsylvania for a part of its life and then moved to Vermont and raised for a substantial period of its life here and then was slaughtered here. What did the term originate mean? And with this definition, there was never really a definition provided for the term originate. So what we were hoping when this change was made at the legislative level was to really dig into understanding exactly what local food means for a lot of different products that are made here. So we're going to start first with, well, I guess you can move to the next slide, Trevor. Sorry. So there's three different categories that we've kind of helped define and provide guidance on that the legislature thought would be a good way to start parsing through different food products that are made in the state. There are raw ag products, there's processed food, and unique food products. And this change did go into effect starting January 1st of this year. So raw food products, these are, very, I'm hesitant to say straightforward, but think about, produce, things that are grown here, things that are raised here. A lot of these products are pretty straightforward. It's not going to be super hard to really identify if a raw ag product is from Vermont because a lot of them are grown here. But there is some areas that required further defining. Maple syrup, making sure it was exclusively grown or tapped here. Beef, there's a whole host of conditions that need to be met if we're selling beef and calling it made in Vermont or local beef. Milk, of course, gets its own call out because it's been such a in the know, in the how ag product for the state over the last some odd decades. And honey gets its own call out as a raw ag product as well. I'm not going to take the time to read verbatim what these tests are, but if you have questions about raising animals here, so on and so forth, let's talk about that when we get to the question and answer section. Trevor, you can move on to the next slide. So processed food, this was one of the real reasons that we're excited about this new local definition, because it actually provides some context and understanding of what a processed food is and how a processed food can hold itself out as a Vermont or a local to Vermont product. So when we think processed, this is not necessarily an exhaustive list that's found in this paragraph here, but when we look at canning, cooking, dehydrating, milling, or addition of other ingredients, that's how one would typically define a food that's been processed and taken from its raw state, blended with something else and substantially transformed, for lack of a better way to describe it, into a product that we would consider to be a product not in its raw or existing state. So to meet the processed food requirement for this new definition, a majority of these ingredients, meaning 50% of all products by volume, excluding water, are raw ag products that would be considered local to Vermont. But this is not the only requirement to meet this statutory definition. In addition to that, a company needs to be headquartered in the state, or that product needs to be processed in the state. So that does provide a little bit of flexibility depending on when and where a product is processed. We understand and recognize that there is a lot happening in the ag world in and around our border communities, and as long as the requirement of 50% or all is met, and then a company is headquartered or the food is processed here, that processed food is able to hold itself out as a local food or a Vermont food. Trevor, you can move on to the next slide. Okay, unique food product category. And this one's fun. This one is giving our local definition team a lot of fun and interesting scenarios to really dive into and understand the breadth of products that are being grown or processed or what have you in the state of Vermont. Unique food products are really interesting because the basis of a unique food product means that the raw ingredients for this product may not necessarily be found in sufficient quantities to really meet that raw ag product or that processed food product requirement that we saw in the last two product categories. And one of the examples that I like to think of when I think of unique food product is coffee. There's a lot of really great coffee roasters in this state, but there's not a lot of coffee beans being grown in the state, obviously. But those companies roasting those products typically would, employ the craftsmanship or what we think of as a Vermont product or a local product. So there is still an ability for you to meet one prong of this test using a majority of raw ingredients that are local to Vermont. However, because of the example that I just used, there is still an opportunity for a business that would be considered a unique food product category to meet this definition and to be able to hold themselves out as a local food product. They would have to be headquartered here, and also a product would need to be substantially transformed here. I know there's a lot of questions about the legal term of art, substantial transformation. It's a term of art that really is subjective to a certain set of facts, but I just want to read, and this is found on our website, just so everybody understands what we mean when we're saying substantially transform. Substantial transformation is a term not defined in this law per se, but it occurs when a new or different food product emerges from a process with a new name, character, or use different from that possessed by the ingredients prior to processing. Again, we understand that that's subjective, and myself and the team here is always willing to help folks if they're not understanding if they may meet that definition to determine whether or not they can consider themselves a unique food product, but they could still meet the unique food product category without having to go that route if they're using raw ag products or if they're headquartered here. Okay, moving on. Because we understand that there's a lot of border communities, there's a lot of back and forth between New Hampshire, Vermont, Massachusetts, Vermont, New York, Vermont, Quebec, Vermont. There is still an opportunity to refer to a product if it doesn't strictly meet the definition of local to Vermont as a product that's local to a specific region as defined by political boundaries. So I think about local to New England, local to a certain town in New York, local to a certain town in New Hampshire, but it's being sold in Vermont. You're more than able to hold your product out as long as it specifically states where that product is local to and doesn't just leave that loose general moniker of local. You can also represent it as a geographic location. I know in Vermont we like to think of the Upper Valley or the Champlain Valley or the Mad River Valley, so on and so forth. And that you really need to, that's where the 30 miles still kicks in. So you would need to ensure that from point to point, that definition, or excuse me, that holdout of local to a certain region meets that 30-mile criteria. And if it doesn't, then you would need to define that specifically. So Trevor, you can move on to the next slide. I think that's where I'm going to hand it back off to Trevor.
All right, thanks, Kyle. I'm going to hand it over to Shannon. Again, Shannon's from the Attorney General's Office Consumer Protection Division, and she's going to be talking a little bit about enforcement and inquiries related to this law. So, Shannon, I'll just say so you know and others, there is a little bit of delay as I'm advancing the slides. So that's what that sort of awkward gap is. So take it away.
Great, thank you, Trevor. I'm sorry, I'm hearing an echo. Let me just, there we go. Is Chris, are you on as well? I'm not sure if he's there. I might be joined by Chris Curtis, who's also the chief of the Public Protection Division as well. So as Trevor mentioned, I'm an assistant attorney general within the Consumer Protection Division, and enforcing labeling laws is nothing new, as I'm sure many of you are aware. There's a Vermont origin rule, which we have enforced consistently for several years. And, consistent with Attorney General Donovan's approach to many laws, our approach to this law is really to primarily educate businesses and individuals as to how best to comply with the law. As Attorney General Donovan repeatedly references, he likes to create a culture of compliance, and that's our goal here as well with this law. So while we do have enforcement authority to impose penalties or injunctive relief, which simply means asking companies to stop violating the law, our primary goal is always to educate and help businesses come into compliance with the law. So as this slide mentions, if you do notice a violation of this law, you're welcome to file a complaint with our office by emailing us. And I can just talk a little bit about what happens if you do file a complaint. We will look into the issue, see if there is a violation. Unfortunately, we generally do not disclose the details of our investigation. So if, for example, an individual sends us information about a particular grocery store that's violating the law, we wouldn't be able to follow up with that individual about the particular particulars of that violation. But rest assured, we do look into every complaint. And if we do find a violation, like I said, our first and primary goal is to educate that business about the new law. And especially because this is a new law, we would want to work with that business as and try to get the business up to speed on the changes to the new law. I do want to just briefly touch on the Vermont origin rule. So the Vermont origin rule is a rule. It's not a statute, but it has the force of a statute. And this new statutory change does replace parts of the Vermont origin rule, but not all parts of the Vermont origin rule. The two parts that of the Vermont origin rule that are still applicable and everyone should know still apply are the parts. The first is the part about company names. So if you have a company that has the word Vermont in it, in the actual title of your company, not just on your label, the Vermont origin rule would still apply. And I'm not sure anybody in this group is selling non-food products, but if you were selling non-food products such as socks or shirts, the Vermont origin rule would still apply to you. This law only applies to food products. So just be aware that the Vermont origin rule does still apply in some situations. And if you have questions about the Vermont origins rule, you're welcome to contact me directly at the email address on the screen. And I'm happy to answer more questions about our role toward the end of this presentation, but I think that's it for now. So I can turn it back to Trevor.
Great, thanks, Shannon. Next, I'd like to invite Alan and Jacob from the Hanover Co-op to talk a little bit about how they're interpreting this and dealing with the change from a retailer standpoint. So Alan and Jacob, thanks for joining us.
Very good, thank you, Trevor. Jacob and I have had an opportunity to talk a lot about this, and I'll let Jacob pick it up. And Jacob, as you do so, do introduce yourself with your role here at our cooperative.
Thank you, Alan. So my role here at the co-op is I am the merchandising manager. So I oversee a team of buyers who choose products and work with vendors and again choose products that we carry in our store locations. So that's kind of my role here at the co-op, working on policies as well. So what I want to talk about today is, first I'm actually kind of excited to see the agency working on this project. So for a long time, we've felt that it's really important that when we market products as local, that they are truly local. because transparency is an important part of our business. But also, addressing the definition of local is also a thoughtful way. In a thoughtful way like this helps to protect farmers and producers, and I think strengthens the Vermont economy as well. So that's definitely a critical need now with the pandemic. Another reason that it's important to look at the definition of local and make it what it should be is because our customers want to buy local and they want to feel good when they do that. So that's kind of a real retailer standpoint there is, this is what customers want and they want to feel good about it. So if the work that the agency is doing can help create transparency and strengthen the economy, I think both consumers and producers can benefit from that. So one of the ways that we kind of take this type of thing seriously as a retailer is we want to be sure our employees understand why we need to make changes and what those changes will be. So we're a rather large organization. We have over 350 employees, 4 retail locations. So it's definitely a challenge, but one worth pursuing. So our approach when it comes to local labeling is usually a top-down one, where we want to be sure the managers, the top levels, understand the changes first, and then see that information gets passed down from a store manager to a department manager to supervisors and clerks and such. And we have an open door policy at our top levels so that employees have the opportunity to ask questions. We also work to maintain our local signs for accuracy, but also to keep them looking fresh. We generally clean up our local signage about twice a year. And we're replacing the old signs that are tattered or missing, or adding signs for new products. It could probably be done more often. Sometimes it's something that kind of falls by the wayside, so it's important to be organized and write that down. But I think, in thinking, for us, we have a large organization, so we have a certain management structure, the way policies and changes get passed down. I think for any smaller retailers that are on the call today, as a manager, you have a lot on your plate, and labeling local may not be on the top of your list with everything else that you have going. So one thing that I would encourage, and we've seen this successful in other areas of our business too, is identifying a team member whom you could empower to kind of take this on and make it their own, like a local captain, if you will. And this is a team member who could, learn about the law, be sure that the signs in your store meet those guidelines, and this person can also keep an eye on online marketing pieces. And it's also cool because it's an opportunity for other members of your team besides yourself as the manager to talk with and educate your customers about local. So I think empowering others within your store to learn and take this on can be really beneficial. So related to that, there's probably, if you're busy, you don't have a lot of extra room or time to print signs, have a lot of extra room for signs. So, one thing you could do as well is create a generic template, with your logo or the name of your store that says, we love local Vermont, something along those lines, that can be quickly placed near local products. Be sure you laminate anything you're going to put in a cooler or freezer, otherwise they won't last very long. But that's a good project for your quote unquote local captain to work on. One scenario I wanted to talk about that we encounter, we have stores in Vermont and New Hampshire. We have a store in the White River store, and then we have stores in Hanover and Lebanon, New Hampshire. So we are selling products across the border all the time. And I'm really glad that the new guidelines address this. Our customers are less concerned about the state lines, and they're more concerned about buying products that are grown or produced nearby. And I know we're not the only Vermont retailer offering local products from outside Vermont. So again, I think it's really great that the guidelines address this. So one thing we've done is, for example, we buy produce, a lot of produce from Edgewater Farm in Plainfield, New Hampshire. So when we are signing the products, potatoes, carrots, whatever it may be, our signs will say Upper Valley grown. So we're talking about that region, and then we're saying Edgewater Farm, Plainfield, New Hampshire. So there's plenty of transparency there. We've got a geographical region as well as the name of the farm and the town and state that they're from. One more piece that Kyle didn't talk too much about, but you might have questions about is online marketing channels. So your website or social media platforms. So we try to be very clear on where our local products come from, whether they're from Vermont or from New Hampshire. And because the word local is going to mean something different wherever that consumer is viewing that platform or that information from. They could be looking at our website from Tennessee. So just the word local is going to take on a different meaning. So we are really careful, even with Vermont products, to say, this is from, Burlington, Vermont. So it's kind of some of my notes here. I'm happy to answer any questions you might have, either during the question and answer session, and I'm sure that we could get you my contact info as well if you had questions later on that you didn't think of right away. Alan, do you have anything you want to add on to that?
No, Jacob, I think you summed it up well. Just want to save some time for Q&A. We're right on track. Local is a lot, and it's up to us as retailers to stand behind.
Thank you.
Great. Jacob, Alan, thank you both. Appreciate the offer to stay on for the Q&A. And Jacob or Alan, feel free if you want to put your contact information into the chat. Everybody, at least who's using a computer, will be able to see that contact info. If folks calling in on the phone have questions about that, you could reach out to Kyle and we could connect you guys as well. So next, I'm going to hand it over to Annie Rowell, and he's going to talk a little bit about sort of the institutional distribution side of the impacts of this new law.
Great, thanks, Trevor. Hi, everyone. It's great to be here today. As Trevor said, I'm Annie Rowell, and I am the Vermont First Coordinator for Sodexo. For those who don't know, Sodexo provides food service for many campuses, 2 hospitals, and a few businesses in Vermont. And my work is all about getting more local into those accounts. So when Vermont first started in 2015, we aligned with the state of Vermont local definition. That was really important to be to Sodexo to be in alignment, to be talking like terms with Farm to Plate, with Agency of Ag, and with our measurement systems. So with that, this past summer, with the new definition rolling out, we first looked at the changes and identified what makes sense for when we start adopting this, and how we implement it across all the different campuses and accounts in the state, and then work it back through the distributors that we buy from. So we decided that this current fiscal year, starting kind of our tracking back to August through July is the year that we'll be starting, but we didn't really make this transition until a couple months ago, so we were already into the year. And in kind of talking about this with Agency of Ag, I really just want to emphasize how kind of flexible and accommodating they've been in knowing that there will need to be a transition period, and that might look different for various places. So I think that I can't emphasize that piece enough. But as we rolled out this new definition, first we looked at, I manage our tracking system for all products and identifying which ones are local, and then kind of the strategic work behind that for making sure that our chefs and purchasing managers are buying the right items. So with that, we built, we restructured it and identified the items that will currently count under the new local definition, and then with that, the list of the items that no longer count. And with that transition, been meeting with the chef and management team for each account to make sure that they understand the changes, and know, you know, which dynamics to look for, and kind of what the transition plan for products that will be a little trickier to identify in the short term. And sort of with that, then have been starting to meet with the distributors we buy from, to kind of identify some of the trickier areas. In addition to just the items that are not produced in Vermont, that's a pretty clear area of a big change. But the items that we know will be challenging in the short term to identify, essentially are the aggregated items. So one interesting point for milk that we saw with the new definition, is that it says that, you know, the majority of aggregated milk must be from within the state. So that was just an interesting dynamic for us to look at, for where our milk comes from, and if the majority of it does come from Vermont, that it, you know, can count as local. For aggregated items, again, for meat, that one is always just a tricky piece, as meat does generally operate on more of a regional scale. And so continuing to learn more and work with one of our main distributors for that, Black River Produce, on you know, further honing in on exactly the percentages for the different brands that they carry. And similarly, for aggregated items, with Black River, the native code, that is the kind of the shorthand that Black River uses for identifying local items, that has been used for many years. That does include non-Vermont items. So Black River has been awesome in looking into how to better identify specifically Vermont grown items. And so that, again, is still a very big lift, and a lot of you know, a lot of kind of back of the house pieces that need to be worked to make that clear for Vermont grown items. So we're working through that with Black River and with Agency of Agriculture, but in the meantime, what we're currently also planning on is encouraging folks to continue to buy native as in this transition year, but in our reporting and when we're making local claims, that we will just provide disclaimers about those items that you know, in this transition period, you know, we know that there will likely be some non-Vermont items counted under that local produce number. So that's kind of where we stand at this point for the transition. We have, for this year, we will use the new definition for our local reporting, but there are still areas that we are working on further to better be able to make that local claim as we fully transition into this definition.
Great. Thank you so much, Annie. A really great example of dealing with the changes and impacts of this on a really large scale. So hopefully you can stick around and act as a resource if you folks have questions for the Q&A.
Yes.
Great, perfect. So we're going to finish up with Abby Willard. Abby is the head of the development division at the Agency of Ag and has been instrumental in sort of shepherding these changes and providing guidance and expertise throughout the process. So I'm going to hand it over to Abby.
Thanks, Trevor. And thanks everybody for getting on the webinar today. It's kind of a nice thing to do, hopefully on a on a snowy Tuesday. On behalf of the agency and the Attorney General's office, we're just really appreciative of people coming out to engage in the webinar, taking time to ask questions with us. We really wanted to encourage this next part of the webinar to be an interaction, to be a conversation where we can gather input and questions from you as businesses and supply chain partners that may be impacted and influenced by this new local food definition. We see this webinar as well as some of the other outreach efforts that we've done. So some email communication, a creation of a succinct 2-page summary of the new statute, and some frequently asked questions that are also available on our website. And Lynn Ellen attached the link. If you're joined the webinar, you can see the link to the Agency of Agriculture webpage that includes access to those resources. So again, just really hoping we can use the remaining time that we have to capture suggestions and a sense of how well this definition may be working for your business needs, and really appreciate the input from Annie and Jacob and Alan about how it's impacted their businesses. So additionally, if you have questions after today's webinar, which again is recorded as was mentioned and will be posted on our website, reaching out to Kyle Harris, who's point of contact for the local food definition. His information, both email and phone, was also included in the chat. You can also find ways to reach any of us that are part of the local foods definition team here at the agency or the Attorney General's office by visiting our website. So with that, I'm going to open it up. Post questions in the chat, or raise your hand as Peter and Steve have just started to do. And just know that any additional questions that are captured during this conversation will help update our frequently asked questions document that will again be updated on our website.
Thanks, Abby. Peter, I saw your hand go up first, so go ahead with your question.
Thank you. Peter Youngbear with the Plainfield Co-op. And I thank my cooperators from across the river for their input today. That was all very helpful. We're a much smaller scale than they are. My question specifically has to do with baked items, from bakeries. We have a number of good bakeries here in central Vermont, Red Hen, Mangy's, La Panciata, and others. Do they all meet the definition of unique here because they are locally owned and are transforming their product with no information about where the primary ingredient flour comes from?
Kyle, do you want to take a stab at that?
Yes, thanks, Peter. Good to hear from you. I believe bakery products even got their own call out specifically in the unique food product category. All bakery items should be good to go, as you mentioned, as long as they're substantially transformed here and headquartered here. We certainly know at the agency that food grade grains also haven't really reached that point of a decision to move it out of the unique food product category maybe one day, but as I stated, they have their own specific call out, and those should all fit into the unique food product category very nicely.
Thank you.
So Peter, this is Abby again. I just want to add one piece related to your question, and if others coming from other retailers, and this has been a piece that we've been considering even within the agency around kind of the responsibility of a retailer around this new local food definition. And to be clear, our belief and the intent behind this definition would be that it's not a retailer's responsibility to determine if an individual food product it meets the local definition, but more that it's your responsibility, kind of to the piece that Jacob referenced, that if you're offering additional point of sale materials, highlighting and focusing on Vermont made or locally grown products or other in-store marketing efforts of local, that you would then need to determine that the products that you're including in that section or you're attaching and adhering that point of sale material to would meet the local definition. but that it's the business's responsibility to ensure that they are following the local food definition and meeting any labeling requirements related to that definition. So hoping that we can help clarify that a little bit, but it looks like that also generated more questions, so that's exciting.
Thanks, Abby. I'm gonna do my best to sort of go in order here. I think Steve Gorlick was next.
Hey, yeah, I'm Steve Gorlick. I'm with Buffalo Mountain Food Co-op in Hardwick and the Small Farm Guild. I have to say that I'm really disappointed with the new definition of local. By making it synonymous with made in Vermont or grown in Vermont, you've essentially eliminated the standard definition that people had in mind, which was something grown or produced nearby within 30 or 50 miles. And I don't see the point in it. In fact, now, you know, you've got something in Brattleboro that produced in the Brattleboro region that will be sold in Newport, is almost 200 miles away. And that's now called local when it wouldn't have been before. One of the impacts of this is that large-scale growers, like say Pete's Green, who is in the Craftsbury area, he's going to be local throughout the state of Vermont now. We'll be competing with smaller, more genuinely local producers all over the state. And I think that's contrary to the aim of the whole local food movement from the start. And that sort of thing, and you're violating that, and I'm not sure what the point of it was, especially since you already had a made in Vermont or grown in Vermont definition that you could have continued to use. So I just want to go on record as saying I'm not happy at all with the new definition.
Thank you, Peter. Abby, I don't know if you wanted to respond, or Kyle, or if that was more of a comment than a question.
Steve, yeah, we're happy to have a conversation offline if you would like. I would like to point out though that some of your comments are not 100% true. Previously, a product had to originate in the state of Vermont or 30 miles from the point of sale. So there was still an opportunity for some of those companies that you mentioned for a product to originate from a town in Newport and be sold in Bennington and still be held out as local.
And the only additional comment that I might add, Steve, and I agree, I think it'd be great to have a conversation offline because I think you bring forth valid points about a shift in the focus of the local definition. And we, in a variety of different stakeholder conversations and meetings with businesses and other supply chain partners, came to an understanding that the local food movement had matured to a point that we were ready, and many were looking for this synonymous association between being made in Vermont, grown in Vermont, and being a local food product. I do recognize that does shift a little bit for some businesses around a very hyper-local and regional benefit. And there are some aspects of this definition that still encourage that type of promotion and marketing, that you could still have a product that's local to the Upper Valley, as Kyle gave examples of earlier in the presentation, or local to the Champlain Valley that could even extend across state borders, political boundaries. So there are still aspects of this new local food definition that I think address some of that local kind of community aspect of our local food movement that you're celebrating.
Yeah, I'd appreciate the opportunity to discuss it offline. I'm not sure how to go about that, but maybe you've got my email address from signing up. I'm not sure.
Yeah, Steve, the easiest, if you can put into the chat, or I'm sure that we can track you down. We're pretty good at that. So Walter Judge, I
Okay.
believe you were next.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, thank you. So, Steve actually, I don't know Steve, but whoever Steve is, actually captured, I guess, the essence of what I was going to ask about, which is, so there is the option of modifying the term local so that if you're in Brattleboro, you can sell a product from Keene as local, as long as you put local from Keene or local to Southern New Hampshire or some other acceptable modifier on the word local. But you can just use, but if you're selling something, if you're selling, an apple in Brattleboro, you can simply use the word local if it's from St. Albans, which I guess I would join Steve in saying, I don't think that's anyone's definition of local.
Walter, thanks for the comment. We're also happy to follow up. Maybe we could get Steve and Walter together in a conversation, or I'd be happy if you want to leave your contact information to continue the conversation. If that works for you.
Yeah, I will. I guess there's a method of giving you my contact information.
Yeah, as I said, if you can put it in the chat, or you can email Kyle Harris, whose contact is up on the screen here. I think Abby sort of alluded to this earlier too. This is this is the beginning of a longer process. So we are looking for this kind of feedback and really encouraging that and hoping to, refine this over time. So there may be opportunities in later legislative sessions to think about updating these definitions, incorporating some of this feedback. So certainly not a static thing. We're not here to just say this is the new law and you need to comply. It's really meant to be a conversation with you all. So any of this feedback, good or negative, is welcome, and we look forward to continue those conversations.
Yeah, and I would just quickly add, the interesting thing about this change is everybody kind of thinks of local differently. Everybody's kind of got their own definition of what local means to them, and that rings true in the state of Vermont. It rings true if you're in Nevada or wherever the case may be. But I think one of the main goals here was to protect those inherent qualities that a lot of Vermont producers abide by. And that's not to say that that's a producer across the border in Keene, New Hampshire, as you alluded to, Mr. Judge, may possess those same qualities, but ensuring that the words Vermont and local mean a certain thing if it's being sold in the state of Vermont.
Great, thanks, Kyle. Will, I don't have your last name on my screen, but your hand is up.
Yeah, hey, this is Will Drucker. I'm with Appalachian Gap Distillery in Middlebury, Vermont. We source 65% of our grains from a farm on the New York side of the Champlain Valley. It is about 32 miles by road, but shorter as the crow flies, obviously, because it's got to get across the Champlain or Lake Champlain. And was just curious. I think even though we're substantially transforming the ingredients and we are headquartered in Middlebury, that distance is maybe a moot point. But just out of curiosity, how is that boundary being defined? Is it road miles, or is it sort of a 30-mile radius as the crow flies? Maybe splitting hairs, but kind of curious. That's my first question. And the second question is the point of sale definition. Obviously, we're transforming all the ingredients at our distillery, but then we have various points of sale, 802 spirit shops across the state and a variety of farmers markets. So how should we maybe be thinking about that? Are we only able to say they're local, if they fall within that 30-mile radius of our distillery or of where the ingredients are grown? Or hoping to get a little more clarification there.
I can take a stab, Trevor. So, Will, thanks for the question. Beverages have a specific call out in the unique food product category, and that would mean that you would fall into the unique food product category if you're distilling spirits or, producing beer or whatever the case may be from a beverage perspective. If you want to shoot me an email, I don't know, what specific marketing materials you're using, but if you want to say that I think you said you were in Middlebury, correct? If you want to say local to a certain geographic location or region, then the point-to-point as the crow flies may come into play, but because of your qualification into the unique food product category, so long as your business is headquartered in state and you're substantially transforming those raw ingredients into what I would imagine is an awesome spirit, you should fall nicely into the unique food product category without much more thought.
Okay, thank you.
No problem.
Thanks, Will. Alan, it looks like your hand is up next.
Thanks very much, Trevor. Just to address a couple of the comments that have come before, great comments from Steve and Walter. I'll pick up on something Jacob said. What you can do and what we do in our stores is to go with that laminated sign and go with a miles to co-op angle, or miles to market if you're an independent grocer or a chain store. That's a way that the consumer can look at it and go, that doesn't feel local. That's Brattleboro, or that's 75 miles away. But also this idea of miles and putting a marker on it, you have to define it in some way. I think the state's choice of being very firm within its boundaries with a little buffer on the edge is helpful. Because if you look at your own community, say it's in the middle of the state, you say, hey, local for us is 30 miles away. And as Will just said, what happens when it's 37 miles away and they're growing it in the soil? I think the Vermont thing is something you can look at. The last thing I'll touch on is I believe this is a very important step, because frequently with larger commercial entities, local is becoming diluted, and I believe that making sure that we're clear about that it is Vermont is vitally important. And then by indicating distance from your store, that helps the consumer decide if it's local enough for them. But also the suggestions that Kyle and Abby have made are really strong ones. So that's my comment.
Alan, thanks for that feedback, those comments. Annie, I think you're next.
Yeah, thanks. I just wanted to add that this new definition does clear up a lot of some of the gray areas that did exist that were pretty vague in the old definition. So as someone who's kind of lived by identifying items that count or don't count for the last 6 years, I think this definition has really helped, particularly in the beverage area with the unique food products, and just generally in anything processed. So I think that that's really an area that stands out to me with this new definition.
Thanks, Annie. I don't see anybody else with a hand up. Will, your hand is still up. Feel free to jump in if you had another question, but I would encourage anybody else to speak up or drop a question in the chat if you did have one.
Maybe before Walter goes, I did want to make a quick comment about Will's product for a quick second. So one unique thing about this new local food definition is that while Will's Spirits may be able to be considered a local food product, Will, you could also make a claim about the apples coming from New York being such a short distance, likely still from within the Champlain Valley, that you can also make a claim about the raw ingredients used in the creation of your value-added food product. So that level of clarification, and as Annie referenced, is more nuanced and helpful in this updated definition, and that level of detail didn't exist in the previous Vermont plus 30 definition. So the hope is that you can actually make multiple product claims, both about the food product and about the ingredients and where they're sourced. I just wanted to pop that in. Yeah.
Go ahead, Walter.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Thank you. I'm not used to this Microsoft Teams platform, so I do not know how to access the chat function.
Okay. Can you see Kyle's contact information on the screen?
Yes.
Probably the easiest thing would just go ahead and send Kyle an email, and then he'll have your email saved and can pick up with the conversation.
I do want to make sure that Steve Gorelick is included in the conversation, and anyone else who wants to talk about the definitional aspects of changing the rule from what I thought was pretty clear, 30 miles from the point of sale, to now something that's much more complicated.
Yeah, and I would encourage folks again to just work through Kyle with that, and would be happy to do some more follow-up, get some groups together to continue this conversation, either on an individual basis or hosting some more public forums. We're very open to that as well. Any other questions?
Are you open to revisions?
Yes, as I said, this is not a static process. I think the caveat there is that that's a legislative process. So that's going to, take some time and re-engagement of the state legislature. So we certainly are not closing the door or anything like that, and very happy to explore those ideas. I would just, put that sort of caution out that it's something that would take some time to work through the legislative process. Alan?
Yeah, just a point of clarification, and Abby, you can certainly jump in on this, but Walter, as I understand the law, previously, it was never a 30-mile definition within the state of Vermont. The local law, as it previously stood, always was a Vermont border law, with retailers who are close to the border being able to source from just over the river. So for instance, at our Hanover store, we have a great organic grower in Killdeer Farm in Norwich. They're 3 miles away. And we don't have to call it local. We could call it Upper Valley grown. But the law previously allowed for Vermont in the state, no 30-mile designation. It was that border thing that the 30 miles came in. Am I correct on that, Abby?
Yeah, Alan, you are. And I think what Steve and Walter and you are all bringing up was essentially a confusion, and in some cases a misunderstanding and misconception of what the Vermont plus 30 definition actually was intended by statute, and then how it was being implemented. So because it didn't adequately address value added and processed products, and it had a misinterpretation, somewhat coming from us, I'll say, at the Agency of Agriculture, this change in the definition was designed to be more accurate, to be more thorough, and again, to sort of address both those border community needs and considerations, as well as this ubiquitous nature of being from the state of Vermont means that it's local. And that doesn't mean that an individual retailer can't make a claim of something that's local to a particular county or local to a region. And that point of sale material and that marketing is still permissible as long as the claims are accurate. So no one's taking that right away. And if that's really important to a community or a region of the state to be able to make those types of local to claims, they absolutely still can. But I think, Walter and Steve, it's a great follow-up conversation for us to have, if nothing else, just to ensure that we have clarity. We're happy to do that.
Thanks, Abby. We are getting close to the end, or gone a little bit over here. I know some of us are happy to stay on if there are other questions that people want to ask. But if everybody feels like they got their questions answered, again, I would just point you to our webpage, which has a lot of information about summarizing the impacts and the changes to this, Kyle's contact information, FAQs, and just encourage everybody, if they do have questions or concerns, to reach out to Kyle. He is not afraid of a packed inbox, so feel free to use that channel. And just wanted to say thank you to everybody who participated today and everybody who tuned in and offered their insights and feedback. And again, this is something that we are looking to work with folks on and just try to make it as reasonable and frictionless as possible, while also sort of acknowledging that there may be needed changes down the line. So with that, I'd just like to wrap it up and thank you all for coming. You can find this posted on our website in a day or so, and enjoy the lovely snowy Vermont day and take care.
Thanks, everybody. Appreciate it. Don't hesitate to reach out to me. And a special thank you to Alan, Jacob, and Annie for helping us move through this webinar this afternoon.
Happy to play a role. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Take care.